The smoke was still rising from my burned winter stockpile when the HOA president walked onto my property and told me maybe now I would finally learn to follow community standards. That sentence changed everything because what she and the entire neighborhood did not understand was that my stockpile was not just firewood and equipment sitting around for decoration. It was part of the private spillway system that protected the lower half of the neighborhood during winter flood season. And 3 days later, when the storm hit and I finally opened the emergency release gate, the same people who laughed while my supplies burned were suddenly watching water rush straight through their streets. My name is Garrett Nolan, and I have lived near the edge of this mountain community for almost 10 years. Long before the HOA existed, this area had natural runoff channels built into the land. Because winter storms here can become dangerous very quickly, most newer residents never paid attention to any of it because the system usually worked quietly in the background. But I paid attention because my property bordered the old spillway access route, and maintaining part of it had basically become my responsibility. Over the years, I kept emergency tools, drainage equipment, sandbags, fuel, and winter supplies stored near the control structure behind my land. Nothing illegal, nothing dangerous, just practical preparation for heavy snow and runoff season. But to the HOA, it looked ugly. The president of the association was a woman named Celeste, and Celeste cared more about visual appearance than actual function. She once fined someone for leaving a canoe visible beside their garage for today. So when she noticed my winter stockpile, she immediately decided it was a problem. At first, the HOA sent warning notices calling it unsightly outdoor storage. I explained repeatedly that the materials were emergency supplies tied to runoff control and seasonal safety preparation. I even showed them documentation from older county records referencing the spillway system, but Celeste dismissed all of it, said the neighborhood was modern now and did not need rural clutter ruining property values. Before this gets crazier, make sure you like and subscribe to Karen Stories Daily, because what started as a petty HOA complaint eventually turned into one of the biggest disasters this neighborhood had ever seen. During storm season, normally I avoid HOA fights. I keep to myself, fix my own problems, and stay out of community drama. But Celeste seemed obsessed with proving she had authority over every square inch of visible land. And afternoon, she arrived with 2 board members and demanded I remove the stockpile within 72 hours. She refused, calmly explained again that winter storms were approaching and those supplies existed for a reason. But she laughed and said the HOA maintenance crews could handle anything the weather brought. That sentence honestly worried me more than anything else, because I knew those crews had absolutely no understanding of the actual runoff system protecting the lower street. Still, I tried avoiding conflict. Tunnel. The fire happened at it was late evening when I smelled smoke outside. First, I thought one of the neighbors was burning leaves illegally. Then I saw orange light near the spillway shed. By the time I reached the area, flames were already spreading through my stacked sandbags, wooden barriers, and emergency fuel storage. Rex firefighters arrived quickly, and thankfully nobody got hurt, but most of the stockpile was destroyed, and several neighbors later admitted they saw HOA contractors near the area earlier that day cleaning unauthorized debris. Nobody could officially prove how the fire started, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Then came Celeste walking onto my property the next morning, acting like the entire thing was somehow my fault. It was when she delivered the sentence I will never forget. Maybe now you will finally clean this place properly. I remember staring at her, wondering if she truly understood what had just been destroyed. Decades without those materials, the spillway system could not be managed safely during a major overflow event. And according to the weather forecast, a massive storm system was already moving toward us, but nobody listened. Not Celeste at the HOA board, not the residents, who thought this was all just dramatic hillbilly flood parano until the rain finally started. And once it started, it did not stop. By the second night, the storm had already become worse than forecasted. Rain hammered the neighborhood non-stop, and runoff channels started filling faster than I had seen in years. That is when people finally began noticing something was wrong. Water started pooling near the lower streets. First, then drainage ditches overflowed. Then backyard fences near the cul-de-sac started sitting in standing water, and suddenly the same neighbors who ignored me before were Now calling non-stop asking why the runoff system was backing up, the answer was simple: because the emergency spillway controls had not been properly prepared. After the fire destroyed most of my winter equipment, normally I would reinforce pressure points with barriers, pumps, and overflow redirection channels before a major storm ever arrived, but now most of those supplies were gone and the HOA maintenance crew had absolutely no idea how to handle mountain runoff pressure. I tried warning Celeste again during the storm. He told her directly that unless the emergency release gate was opened, soon the lower half of the neighborhood would flood within hours, but she still acted like I was exaggerating. She actually accused me of trying to scare residents so I could justify messy storage conditions. At that point, I stopped arguing. Complete Olibicus nature was about to explain everything better than I ever could. Around midnight, county emergency officials finally contacted me directly after water level sensors triggered flood warnings near the spillway. They knew my property connected to the old runoff control access route and asked whether the release gate could still function safely. He told them yes, but opening it fully would send massive water flow directly through the lower drainage corridor running beside the newer HOA development. The official paused for a second, then quietly said, if the gate stayed closed, the flooding would become far worse. So the decision was made. About 20 minutes later, I drove through the storm toward the spillway control structure while rain slammed against my truck so hard I could barely see the road. The entire area looked different at night. Water everywhere, overflow already spilling across pathways and retention ponds nearly full. When I finally reached the gate control platform, the pressure behind it sounded like a dam ready to burst. Honestly, even I felt nervous standing there, but there was no other option anymore. So I opened the emergency spillway release, and within minutes roaring water surged through the flood channel running directly beside the HOA's lower street snow. Thankfully, the system worked exactly as designed. It redirected dangerous pressure away from homes higher on the ridge and prevented catastrophic overflow near the hillside structures, but the lower neighborhood still took heavy water intrusion because drainage routes had not been maintained correctly for years, and suddenly people understood exactly why the old spillway system mattered. Residents stood on porches watching water rush through streets while emergency crews blocked intersections and redirected traffic through the storm. Some homes had flooded garages, landscaping washed out, decorative HOA flower beds completely destroyed in less than an hour. And standing right in the middle of all of it was Celeste, staring at the floodwater in complete disbelief. The next few days became absolute chaos for the HOA insurance adjusters, emergency inspectors, county engineers. Everyone started reviewing the runoff infrastructure situation, and that is when the truth finally came out. The old spillway system had quietly protected the area for decades, but newer HOA leadership ignored maintenance recommendations because appearance upgrades were prioritized over actual flood preparation. Even worse, several residents reported concerns about drainage years earlier, but those concerns were repeatedly dismissed as unnecessary expenses. Since homeowners learned that information, people became furious, especially after discovering the destroyed winter stockpile contained materials directly tied to emergency runoff control. Suddenly, Celeste's obsession with community appearance no longer looked strict, it looked reckless. Within 2 months, she resigned from the HOA board after non-stop pressure from residents. Several board members, left with her and new leadership, immediately started restoring the drainage systems and coordinating proper winter preparation plans with county officials. As for me, I rebuilt the stockpile bigger than before at this time, with official county support and clear emergency designation signs. Nobody could argue with any more. Funny enough, the same neighbors who once complained about the supplies now wave whenever they drive past the storage area, because after seeing floodwater rushing through their streets during that storm, they finally understood something important. Medium's ugly-looking preparation matters a lot more than pretty neighborhood aesthetics. If you enjoyed this story from Karen Stories Daily, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, and share this video. And tell me honestly, would you rather have perfect landscaping or someone nearby who actually knows how to stop a flood before it destroys the neighborhood?